What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be comparing the TCL Stylus 5G to the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. Now before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get started. So with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.81-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5 by 9, and a 90.2% screen-to-body ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 405, an aspect ratio of 20 by 9, and a screen-to-body ratio of about 85.4%. So I would say in general, both phones do have really good displays, but that being said, they do have slightly different strong points. So on one hand, with the TCL Stylus 5G, this phone is clearly much larger, and it also has a taller and more narrow form factor, and that's going to give you a more immersive experience when you're doing something like streaming a video in landscape mode, for example. And when you're doing something like reading or looking at social media, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. And then of course, having a larger display is going to make everything a little bit better and easier to see, so that's always going to be a good thing when you're consuming a lot of content. Now on the other hand, with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, this phone might not be as large, but we are getting a much better quality display with this phone than we are with the TCL Stylus 5G. A Super AMOLED display is going to have brighter and better looking colors, and also the viewing angles on the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G are going to be quite a bit better. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, the A53 5G is going to be quite a bit easier to see than the TCL Stylus 5G. In addition to this, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G has a much higher refresh rate at 120Hz versus the standard 60Hz display, and that means movement on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother. Now you probably can't tell with this video, but when you're actually using the phone, with the A53 5G, if you're doing something like watching videos, playing games, really anything with motion on the screen, you are going to get a slightly better experience, and when you're just using the phone in general, it will feel a little bit more premium. So in general, again, both phones do have great displays. It really just comes down to whether you want it to be larger with better dimensions, or a little bit higher quality. Now for storage, both phones are getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so definitely a good amount of storage. Now if you're a power user, you might want 256, but I would say for the average person, 128GB of internal storage is perfectly fine. And remember, both phones do have microSD card expansion, so you can always use that to offload photos and videos, for example. Now for security features, both phones do have fingerprint scanners. With the TCL Stylus 5G, it's right here on the power key, and with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, it's right here in the display. Now I personally do like in-display fingerprint scanners a lot better. They look a little bit more premium and modern, but having a fingerprint scanner on the power key, of course, is not bad either. And in addition to the fingerprint scanners, both phones do have face unlock as well. But starting with the TCL Stylus 5G, let's go ahead and give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Samsung. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners did work pretty well. And again, remember, both phones also do have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, both phones do have nice looking hole punch designs for the front facing cameras. With the TCL Stylus 5G, it's a tiny bit bigger, but in general, these designs are essentially the same. Now as far as the megapixels go, with the TCL Stylus 5G, this camera is 13 megapixels, and with the Samsung, this camera is 32 megapixels. Then on the back, with the TCL Stylus 5G, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we got a quad camera setup as well. With this camera, we got a 64 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as camera features go, these phones are pretty even. Both of them have pretty much all the features as far as a mid-range phone is concerned. But I would say as far as quality goes, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G does take significantly better photos, and the same goes for video as well. So between the two, if you're taking a lot of photos and recording a lot of videos, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G will have a huge advantage here. But for more casual use, if you're just taking a couple nice photos every now and then, the TCL Stylus 5G will be perfectly fine. And while the photo quality isn't nearly as good as the A53 5G, it still still is pretty good for a mid-range phone. Now that being said, if you want to see actual photo and video samples, be sure to check out my full reviews and camera reviews for these phones. As of the recording of this video, I don't have the camera review for the A53 5G quite done, but as soon as I do finish it, I will put it in there as well. But again, in general, both phones do have pretty much all the features and take great photos, but if you want the best between the two, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G will be the one to go with. In addition to this, as far as video goes, the TCL Stylus 5G has a max recording quality of 1080p at 30 frames per second, and this goes for both the rear and front cameras. And with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, you can record in up to 4K at 30 frames per second in both the rear and front cameras. So again, as far as video goes, clearly the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G has a huge advantage here. And even if you're just recording in 1080p, the same principle is really going to apply. But if you're just recording a video every now and then, maybe for Snapchat for example, the TCL Stylus 5G will be perfectly fine. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with the TCL Stylus 5G we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Samsung Exynos 1280 processor. Now I ran Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a single core score of 560 and a multi-core score of 1755. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we're getting a single core score of 742 and a multi-core score of 1910. So as you can see here, clearly the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is the faster device, but honestly in practice, the difference really isn't that huge. I mean, once you get into higher performance activities like mobile gaming for example, you might see a little bit of a difference, and games are probably going to run a bit smoother on the A53 5G, but in general for normal activities like web browsing, social media, streaming videos, listening to music, stuff like that, these phones are going to be about the same. They're at that level with mid-range phones where you're not going to see a huge performance difference unless you go to a flagship phone like maybe a Samsung Galaxy S21 FE or something. So in general, if you want the faster phone of the two, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G will have an advantage, and yeah, you will notice the difference in performance at least a little bit, but again, the bottom line is it's really not as much as you might think, and the TCL Stylus 5G, while not being quite as powerful as the A53 5G, is still not slow by any means, and for the average user in most situations, it will get the job done just fine. Now as far as battery goes, with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 18 watt fast charging. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging. So as you can see here, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G has a better battery in pretty much every way. Not only is the battery itself larger, giving you better life per charge and better longevity, but the fast charging is also better. So if you have a 25 watt fast charger, this phone in general will charge a little bit faster. So overall, if battery is a priority for you, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G does have a huge advantage here. But if you're not too concerned with battery, maybe you always have your phone plugged in for example, and you don't really care about the actual battery life itself, in that situation, the TCL Stylus 5G will still be fine. And while this battery isn't nearly as good as the A53 5G, it's still not the worst battery out there. So again, if battery isn't a huge concern for you and you just want something decent, the TCL Stylus 5G will be just fine. As far as other features go, both phones do have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, you can do that with either phone. But between the two, the TCL Stylus 5G, as the name suggests, is the phone with the stylus, whereas the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G does not have a stylus. So if you want that feature, then the TCL Stylus 5G will have an advantage. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, in almost every way, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is the better device here. While the TCL Stylus 5G does have a larger display with slightly better dimensions, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G not only has much better display technology, but it also has a higher refresh rate, so if you're doing anything with motion on the screen like watching videos, playing games, that kind of thing, you are going to get a better experience here. In addition to this, the camera quality is just so much better with the A53 5G. You can take much better photos and record better videos, and this phone can also record videos in 4K, whereas with the TCL Stylus 5G, again, you are limited to 1080p here. In addition to this, although again, the difference in performance isn't really as big as you might think, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is a little bit faster, so if you're doing stuff like higher performance gaming or something like that, you are going to get a better experience here. And honestly, if you're just on your phone all the time, it's probably going to be worth it anyway. And if that wasn't enough, the A53 5G also does have a much larger battery, and the battery supports better fast charging too. But on the other hand, the TCL Stylus 5G, while not being quite as good as the A53 5G, does still hold its own. It has a pretty good display, the processor is not half bad, the camera setup is really good, it has all the features and stuff, the battery isn't terrible, and it does have a stylus as well as a headphone jack, whereas as you can see here, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G doesn't even have a headphone jack. So between the two, if you want a slightly higher end device that has better specs, better features, and better performance, then the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G will be the better choice. But if you want something that does work pretty well, has a larger display, and has a stylus, the TCL Stylus 5G is not a bad choice either. But this concludes my comparison between the TCL Stylus 5G and the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next one.